All right, if somebody can give me a thumbs up that they can see the slides and not like my inbox, that would make me feel thank you. Um, all right. Well, thank you all so much for attending today's discussion. Hi, I am Polly Stamatopoulos, she, her pronouns. I am the Senior Director of Program Partnerships at Progressive Multiplier. And I am filling in today for Kafili Thomas, who is on a well-deserved vacation. And I love when I get to fill in for him because I love my Fundraising Friday peeps. So hello to folks who I've seen before. Hello to folks that I've never met. I'm happy to be here today to talk about the new fundraising landscape, which I know is creating lots of angst in lots of the worlds of folks that I'm talking to. So, as always, we like to introduce ourselves at, here at Progressive Multiplier so that you can see our lovely faces, see this hip cool team that we have amassed, small but mighty, but also because sometimes you'll see stand-ins like me showing up at these meetings, or our colleagues will join the conversation, be a fly in the wall, and we just like to be transparent. So this is who we are. These are also folks that you can bug with questions about their specific areas of expertise, of course. But this is our happy team, and I'm really excited to be here today. And as always, we're happy to be here to serve. But like, who are we even? So at Progressive Multiplier, we help organizations build a progressive movement of, by, and for everyday people. Um, so, basically, we believe that organizing people and organizing money is how we make real substantive change in a democracy. And so we are building this space of where we don't gatekeep knowledge, we share information, we're trying to create a community so that of practice where people can get together, share ideas, thoughts, and work together to change the world. That is the poly version of the way better written slide that's here. I didn't want to sound like a PSA by just reading the slide. But if you don't know about very much about Progressive Multiplier, I really encourage you to check out our website and learn a little more. You will get a much better education than what I just did. We make grants. We are a funding intermediary, so we raise money to give it away. We fund fundraising experiments specifically to try that will help build our knowledge, and so that we can educate the movements that we work with. And the three areas of our grant making are achieving justice, realizing democracy, and restoring the environment. If you feel like you've got a really neat fundraising experiment that you would love to try and you wanted to apply for a grant, check out our website. There's a section for grant seekers, and you could always fill out a letter of interest. So, of course, we are here today because of our wonderful partners at Resilience Initiative. Um, we they as well have been right here with us in the trenches, making sure that we are sharing knowledge, and helping to build the movement. So again, in the vein of like community building, please remember to introduce yourself in the chat, exchange information. But also you can, if this is your first, or if you had some sessions that you wanted to check in on that we did in the past, there we've got you. Check out our YouTube channel, and you can find, as well as Resilience Initiatives page, and you can find all the past videos and catch up, or rewatch something that that we taught in the past. So what's available through the partnership with Resilience Initiative? There's one-on-one coaching, as well as fundraising Fridays. So if you want to set up time to get we refer to it as our strategic assistance hours. If you want to set up some strategic assistance time, you can use the URL in this deck. This deck will be shared so you can copy it. You don't have to try to like write down the form, the fanciness from the screen. And of course, you can always just email directly to Michelle and sign up for for hours. But of course, we also have fundraising Fridays, not only the live presentations that we're doing today and other Fridays, but we also have 3 years worth of past trainings that if you've got a question, I'm sure digging through the archives, we've got an answer for you. So again, revisit those sessions at bit.ly Fundraising Friday. All right. What are we talking about today? So we all know that that something is afoot in the funding world, and we're going to just talk about it. So I'll share what we are seeing and hearing in the funding world, why we think what's happening is happening, and then we're going to lean into some of the solutions that we seeded or ways to navigate the always changing landscape. So what we are seeing and hearing. So there's a little bit of, you know, there's a little bit of the issue is just the fact that the nonprofit sector is growing by leaps and bounds. Now, especially in the last 5 years, there have just been a huge number of new nonprofit organizations being formed. Um, I don't always buy into the competition mindset of like, there isn't enough pie, there's always enough pie. But like it would be foolish to not just point to like, yes, there is in fact a lot of competition happening right now. So it just means that like when the funders now are seeing folks apply for their funding, they might have had, 10 options for every grant that they had to give out. Now they've got 15 or they've got 20. Um, Also, I think it's not just the competition because there's more organizations. There's a lot more um, there's a lot more opportunities to learn about funding, lots more search engines, lots more sharing of info. So also folks are hearing about more funders. So there's more organizations and there's more knowledge. And I think that just means there's more demand. I don't know if you've seen this, but I know that I have. There's lots of turnover happening in our in the fundraising in the foundation spaces right now. Um, Program officers that you've had relationships for years or are leaving organizations. We've got just lots going on. When you lose that relationship with the program officer, it can be incredibly scary because you're like, they knew the ins and outs of this really intricate, difficult, hard project. And how am I ever going to get, this type of relationship all over again? Because fundraising is so relationship based, we know that these turnovers absolutely, affect our grant trajectory. We may it may just be a fear more than a reality, but that we're seeing not only are we seeing lots of turnover in our organizations, so the relationships that are being had with the funders can also be jeopardized by those, not jeopardized, but affected by those turnovers. But the turnovers at the foundations themselves, losing especially a valued advocate is going to be a hard hit. And there's some gatekeeping going on. I don't know about you, but it seems like back in the day, you could always see a staff list on a foundation page. You would have your program area well organized with like the head of the program area and all of the people who are working in that program area with their name and even their emails and sometimes their phone numbers. And that info is becoming more and more and more hard to find, as well as very few foundations are accepting unsolicited proposals anymore. So it just is becoming hard to meet with and connect with people at foundations, especially if you don't have a current relationship with them. Even when you do have a current relationship with them and there is a change in staff, if they didn't do an elegant handoff, you might be sitting there going, I have no idea who to reach out to, and there's no evidence on the website for me to figure out how to reach out to somebody. So that's just a reality too. Not insurmountable, and we'll get into that later. there's also just a lack of clarity. Um, it feels like every year, no, almost every 6 months, but every couple years, foundation, you'll get this message from a foundation that it's like, we're taking a time out for our funding for the next 6, 9, 12, 18, 17,000 months to do some navel gazing and to re-strategize and reprioritize our giving. We're doing this because we want to be a better partner to you. And you're like, really, being a better partner to me would be to not disappear for several months at a time, or change your mind about whether or not you want to fund us. Um, but this is just a reality that happens, right? So what you may think of a foundation as like super caring about the subject matter that you're working in, and then suddenly be in this moment of like, do they care? I don't know. Wait, I guess I have to wait till they come back with their strategic priorities being done and see if the stuff that we're working on still is a thing for them. And that process can feel really opaque because if you've done strategic planning, a lot of, while there's often an external scan and an external conversation, it doesn't always include one. Or if it does happen, it might not include you. So it can feel really opaque. It could feel really just sort of scary. It could feel um, like feeling adrift, especially if you really need to talk to somebody. So I see in the chat that somebody was like 50% of their funders are doing that right now. BT Dubs, if you, Brooke, and I see now the name, Brooke, if you want to talk about that, great. Also, like, I love a good convo. Interrupt me, folks, come off mic and interject. I don't need to just like talk at my screen. I want to talk with you. So who else is seeing this? Who wants to talk about this? Is this creating heart palpitations, anxiety? You buying more Tums? What's going on?
I think more and more, I'm learning that I just have to ask other foundations that I have relationships with to say, hey, can you introduce me to new folks, or can you let me know who the new funding partners are? Because it's just been really hard. I think in the past we used to do a search on Foundation Center or on GuideStar, and we'd be able to find some folks in contact information, but it's not that simple anymore.
Yeah,
100%.
really ditto that for me too. It's been all about like just being transparent and saying, hey, a lot of our funders are reconsidering their priorities and taking a pause right now. And here's how that's impacting us. So giving our funders a list then and saying, here's who we're looking at for foundations. Can you introduce us to anyone? Because the flip of this is it feels like everyone is invite only, right? So it's so relationship based. And so much sunsetting. Yes, Parker. Yes.
Oh,
Yes, and is
yeah.
that true, or do they just say that? Because I feel like I've heard at least 3 or 4 foundations say that.
So most of the foundations that I've worked with that have said that they are sunsetting, in fact, do. They will just do it on some will do it on a fast timeline, which is scary AF. And some will do it on a super duper long timeline. I've only one time seen a foundation that said that they were going to sunset and completely changed their mind. Um, uh, and that was Open Society Foundation. They said that they were going to. Um, Soros made that big pledge. So if anyone has gray hair like me, you may remember that there was a pledge in the 90s where folks were like, we're going to give all of our money away and then we're going to shut down. And he was part of that pledge. Many foundations went through that, learned that like giving all of their money away actually didn't fix the systemic problem. So some foundations reconsidered, and Soros was one of those groups that was like, or Open Society was one of those groups that was like, we didn't fix systemic problems by just throwing lots of money at it. So maybe we should stick around a little longer and keep trying to work on the systemic. Everybody's got um, their own reasons, but didn't prevent them also from a few years later we're redoing our strategic, overview, and then wind up shutting different areas of their programs down. So even if they don't sunset, they still might sunset you. So Deborah, I see your hand up.
Yes, I was just going to mention that one of our funders just completely changed their priorities, and where they've been funding, environmental organizations like ours for however long the fund has been open. And now they've taken a 380, 360 turn, 180 turn, I suppose, and going in another direction, not just for us, but several organizations in the Bay Area, which is where I'm located. And it's had an impact, tremendous impact, in all of the environmental education organizations such as mine. And everybody's just like, oh my God. And I think it was because the next generation of the organizers of that fund are having different priorities, in my opinion. That's what I think. The founders of the fund or foundation were like, these are our priorities, and now the kids are starting to manage it. And I think they just have a different idea of what's important. But I don't know. These are just stories I tell myself.
I'd like to hop in too. Hi, my name's Benay Dimig. I'm with Pajaro Valley Shelter Services and somewhat new to this group, so thanks for letting me join in. Um, Deborah, I had the exact same issue this week with a funder, a very large funder, and the son of the people who established the foundation is coming in now. He's out of college and he's like got these great ideas. And so I had a meeting with him this week, and he's not committing to continuing to fund us, and they're a major funder. And yeah, it's scary because he has a very different agenda, and it's an agenda that I don't think that it'll work. I see what he's looking at, and I'm like, wow, that's an interesting take on on homelessness. And so anyway, yeah, we're experiencing that same exact thing with a very large funder. We passed a budget last night at the board that includes their funding with a little, well, not a little, but a big asterisk next to it going, we don't know. We don't know if this is going to happen. So it's very unsettling.
Yeah, I'm going to get into a little bit of that later too, but I think that you're, since we're here, I'm going to jump ahead without necessarily like scrolling through all the slides, but we'll get there again later. There is a tactic you can take if you hear that your funders are re-strategizing and reorganizing their priorities and starting wanting to think differently. Like I saw in the chat about how many organizations that fund repro that are like pulling right now. And I'm like, are you like, it makes my head want to explode. Like, did we not, am I in the twilight zone? Is this when you pull money is when there's the biggest attack? Okay. But right, great timing. The one of the strategies that you can take and that we've done at Progressive Multiplier is to be like, hey, I'd like to put on a little like dog and pony show for you and talk about what the impact of this funding has meant on the movement, on the work that we're doing, not only that we're doing, because you can talk probably really directly about the work that you're doing, how their funding affected that, but also like if you can do that extrapolation and be like the value, the importance of this area. Don't know if this is on even considering being on the chopping block or not, but please don't, because the importance of the funding here is so humongous. And so that you can go into that. You can also say, hey, as you're going through the strategic planning process, if you're doing an external scan or if you need other experts in the room to help guide your conversation, I would love to be part of your focus group or a conversation, so that you can hear from the ground troops what's going on, and try to insert yourself in some of those dialogues so that they're not just having a conversation internally. More than likely they're also talking to their partners, but make sure they're talking to you as one of your partners, or at least try to. Okay, Deborah.
Another thing that I was wondering was whether or not there is a culture of giving at the same rate that there has been with previous generations. Have there been any studies done on that? Because, for a foundation or a fund to sunset, to me, it's saying, we don't have motivation to continue this any longer. And I'm wondering what's causing them to have that lack of motivation? Is it that they're committed to, giving in a completely different form or not at all? And do you know about that?
Well, there's always somebody doing some study about giving. I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't somebody looking at it. Um, I this isn't part of the presentation, but I do think that there's conflicting information that we are giving, we meaning the nonprofit sector is giving foundations. There's a whole bunch of folks that are like, only give unrestricted, right? Which, hey, would love it, but that's probably not realistic to, for foundation to just be like, yes, I'm just going to give only unrestricted money. Um, there's a lot of folks who have been spreading this message, as I mentioned, for decades. You should be spending it all down and you should be giving it all away. And you should, you shouldn't be hoarding capital. And in the past 5 years, there's been like a dozen books written just about that. Um, and so there's a lot of, I think part of it could be a little bit of like a persuasion to, to let some of those dollars go. And then with a lot of family foundations, with every generation that passes, the foundation can often get um, thinned out, meaning that like you might have a family fund that has a pretty big endowment 30 years ago, but now the kids are grown up and now they're now on the board and they want to say, so they might break that family foundation up into 3 smaller foundations because there's such disparate desires to, on how to spend the foundation's dollars. So, I just think there's probably like too many to count reasons why this is happening. Now with the biggest foundations, a lot of it is like, um, they really are going through a strategic planning process and they really are going through some type of a cycle where they're trying to figure out how do we effectively streamline our program so we can put the most assets out and what is their internal data telling them. It doesn't, just because they might be going through that process doesn't mean that we can't try to interject ourselves so that we can still be a seat at the table. I don't know if that answered your question though. Okay. Yeah, so I'm hearing lots of Tums being popped at the moment right now. So the long-term planning is difficult because of what I just said, um but it just like all of this in general, not only like the changes in how foundations are like constantly rethinking themselves, makes it hard, but also they've stopped long-term planning. Some of it I've heard from funders say things like, well, in this era where there's a lot of, like especially the types of folks who would talk about things like cancel culture, they might like, well, like long-term funding is difficult at this time because we need to make sure that we're working with the right organizations and we don't want to find ourselves having to, taking risks, blah, blah, blah. There's always going to be a reason. If, you could also just say, we changed our mind and we don't want to do long-term funding anymore. But that makes it hard for us. Like we know, Progressive Multiplier, like I said, we're a funding intermediary. We mostly do like short-term, meaning 1-year grants. We're trying to figure out how we can expand into long-term funding. It is really hard because we've got to also convince our funding partners to be like, yeah, go long term, please. um, and it just can be scary, but we know you can't see results when you're trying something new or different, especially you're not going to see results in that first minute, in that first year. um and doing a longer term bet will allow for their favorite thing, which is the capturing the data so they can check their boxes. Like, give me a minute, we just set it up, let's let it run for a minute. So yeah, those lack of long-term support, the constantly changing priorities, or at least the threat of the constantly changing priorities, does make planning super hard. So another thing that is like, it used to be less common, but is becoming super common, is it used to be like we would all, we'd go to Grant Station, we'd go to Foundation Center, we'd go to all the different places and be like, my vision, mission, and values align with their vision, mission, and values. Here's their LOI, here's their funding deadline, here's their proposal deadline. And we could just go and we could introduce ourselves and we could, get a way in. But now it's just super hard. Like they've stopped accepting unsolicited proposals. Because they're understaffed, under-resourced, limited. Too many folks are submitting proposals to funders that really have no business. Like there's no alignment, there's no mission alignment, there's no vision alignment, there's no anything alignment, but they, are throwing spaghetti at the wall. And I can understand that could be frustrating for the funders too. It doesn't change the fact that it's getting really, really hard to get funding when the funders are only giving funding to people that they know. So like, how do you get to become a person that they know? And we'll be talking a little bit more about that later too. Deborah, did you want to say anything there?
Well, I mean, the other question I'm wondering, I mean, there's so many urgent things that are going on right now in the world that it feels like an organization like mine, which saying, we teach science and nature education to little kids and get them outdoors, that they're like, okay, well, that's nice. That's cute. You know, happy that you're doing that. But they're, unless we word it as like our organization is stopping the mental health crisis from even starting, and we, jack kids up to be ready for, climate change. I mean, like, I feel like we have to completely change our message to make it really sensational to even grab the ideas or the attention of funders now.
Yeah, I hear you. Are other folks feeling similarly? Like um, you have to become a spin doctor to be able to answer these foundation questions in a way that won't even like check their box.
I definitely feel that. I think our org, I'm Parker Docray. Hi. I am with an org called All Options, and we do like specialize in doing emotional support and counseling for people around pregnancy, parenting, abortion, and adoption. So we're like not providing clinical care, we're not necessarily doing federal advocacy. And I think that it's similar where it's like people want the like, if I give you this money, how will you transform the landscape of reproductive access in this state? And I'm like, we're not going to do that. Like, look at what's happened. And I think for direct service orgs or like educational stuff, it can be harder because I think a lot of places want, and I think for me, it's like also the lack of clarity about what they really want, because there's a lot of buzzwords out there in our orgs as well as in foundations. But sometimes I read the thing and I'm just like, I still don't know like if what we do is what you're interested in funding or not, because it's just like buzzwords.
100%, 100%. Yeah, and there's also just the reality is like a lot of them are now using, this also shows you how old I am, are now using these fancy portals where you got to type this stuff in. Like that's been happening for more than a decade. I realize that, but like these fancy portals that you have to type have these character limits that take you 10 times longer to write the thing, answer the question within this really tiny, like, what is it? I think it was Abraham Lincoln. There's a quote that it was like, I don't have the time to write briefly. I'll always think of that when I'm probably attributing it to the wrong person, but I always think of that when I have to like fill out one of those applications, because it's like, how can I say this ginormous thing in these 250 characters or something, or words, or whatever the limit is? It feels impossible, and it feels like all of the way that you've learned to talk about yourself that works, you have to throw it out the window and find a new way. Now they also have AI scrubbing the proposals and they're looking for buzzwords. So it's like, okay, now I also have to infuse terminology that I just don't use. Not only do I have to talk about myself incredibly succinctly, but I've got to use words that I don't normally use. So the AI filtering process doesn't put me on the no pile right away. And then I think funders just don't realize the gymnastics that we go through to make our applications pass a small test when they should have passed without, without any trouble if there was a human intervention in the beginning rather than technological intervention at the first step. And one of the things that I've learned, and I did it, like, God bless, some of the mistakes that I've made in my past, or some of the gumption that I had when I was too new to the field to know that I shouldn't do things that way. Like, I just reached out to funders and would start talking to folk, and they'd be like, "You're not supposed to talk, you're not supposed to do that." And I didn't know better. But sometimes those I didn't know better mistakes that I made wound up being like fantastic life lessons. So I would literally just have conversations with folks when funders would be like, "Hey, could you," we've all experienced this, I'm sure. They send you this email that sounds benign. Could you just send me real quick some numbers or some info on blah, blah, blah? And what they don't realize is that the request that they sent you is like 8 hours worth of work or 10 hours worth of work, but they say it really nonchalantly. And you're like, are you freaking kidding me? Sending me this at 4:30 p.m. on a Friday, and you want this when? Like, what? I've okay, I'm getting ready to lose my job, responded back and been like, do you have any idea what you just asked me to do? And laid out in an email response, how long it would actually take me to gather this type of information. And they were like, "Oh, dude, no idea. So sorry. I thought I was asking you for a push button thing. Did not realize that at all." And we wound up having a conversation about what are your needs? What do you need? Why do you need this information? How will it help you? Let me see if I can do something that's an easy button for me, but meets your needs. And then we wound up having a really cool conversation, and I wound up whipping something together in 20 minutes, and it met their needs, kept my funder happy, and they got a view through that sometimes when funders make requests, they're actually giant. And, if they didn't catch me on a different day, I would have spent the 8 hours doing the labor to get the answer to the question that actually wasn't what they needed. But they caught me on a day where I was at my wit's end, and I just said the thing out loud. So I learned to start saying the thing out loud, and I had that conversation over and over and over again, and it was incredibly helpful. So I guess part of it is don't let the barriers be a barrier for you, if at all possible. Try to work around it. So if I think that what Brooke said earlier about the, getting introed to other program officers or funders by talking to your current program officer at the current foundation is something that didn't happen in the past. You just, you didn't want to overstep that relationship. Do the thing that feels sort of uncomfortable. Anamike, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Could you want to jump in there? And then Adela.
Sure. Yeah, you were very close. It's Anamika, so very close. Very good job. Yeah, we had a funder that was funding us for very specific work, and they reached out and were like, "Hey, can you? We have an all team meeting tomorrow or Monday, and we want all of this other data, which is not at all what they were funding us to do, and not at all what we track, and so we had to basically scramble and." Basically make our program officer look good is really what that was the request, was to make that person look good to the boss. And so we had to there was a team of 5 of us being how do we spin this to be what she wants? Because really what she wants is to look good to her boss, but that's not what they were funding us to do and not what we normally track. So it was very frustrating. But we did it because they were a big funder. So
Yeah, I mean, look, they're human too, right? And sometimes we have to remember that in these ginormous machines, there are also just people. Some of the best decisions I ever made was to do something way outside of scope to help the human that I was in relationship at that foundation, because that helping that human they owed me, you know, like we didn't say it out loud, but they owed me and they paid it back. And they were like, you know what? I know I can count on Polly. I know that she's a team player and I'm going to let her know that I appreciate that that she did this.
I hope that this program officer feels that way. Because it was a lot of work.
All right, Adela.
Yeah, to the point that you just made about like saying the real thing out loud. I mean, I was wondering if other folks have, and maybe this is in the immigration field, which is where I work, basically everything is dependent upon the executive. And so like, people are like, so, okay, right now we're sort of confronting the fact that the electoral uncertainty means programmatic uncertainty, and funders want like a super precise game plan, and you're kind of like, well, I'm not sure how, to be honest. I'm not, especially, and like as a C3, I'm not sure like how, not honest, but how. I'm also trying to think of like how to say things in a C3 friendly way. But it is like, I feel like this time period in particular is just very complicated.
It is no joke at all. Yeah, it's one of the biggest pet peeves is that they're like, how are you going to keep this work going if we stop funding you? What? And also don't use any of our money on fundraising. Okay, so you're not letting me use the money to build the resources that I need to maintain this program if you stop funding me, but you still want me to show you how to keep this program going if you stop funding me. Or how are you going to navigate this political landscape that might make your work 10 times harder, but without you crossing any lines and talking about that, because you are not allowed to say the word advocacy in any of your emails in response to me. Yikes. Susan?
Yeah, sorry, my video isn't working on, a not-for-profit computer, but I represent a small regional museum, and I want to say about 10 years ago, I don't want to say we were criticized, but criticized that we didn't do enough, outreach into the community. So we've been 10 years later, have a very strong outreach into the entire county, and we wrote a grant proposal to the community foundation, kind of saying we've got all the staff now, we're doing bilingual work, we're, crisscrossing the county, we were asking basically for general operating, and our grant was denied. And when we spoke with the program officers after the fact, they said, well, you needed to be more specific and say that you were going to help these 13 students in this city and these 13 adults in that city. And we're like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, we made all this effort to have a much bigger presence in the county, and now, I think it was basically their argument that they just didn't want to fund us, and so they came up with kind of this lame excuse like you weren't specific enough, and it was just so frustrating for us. Yeah, I don't know if everyone is experiencing that type of frustrations as well.
I do wonder if that's part of like how much tech dependent some of the first wave proposal filtering systems are in effect, because I've heard this from a couple of folks where when they've had conversations with their program officers, they said that it had to, like, sometimes it has to do with like they scrubbed the proposal for these specific cities rather than the county, and if you didn't click enough of the alignment buttons, these automated things, flags didn't wave for you, then it just didn't go to the next round pile. And if, I don't know, I can't say whether or not that's what happened to you, but like, it just points to these like really technically difficult things to maneuver. Like that I think funders don't often know that are technically difficult to maneuver. If you don't know that they want you to be specific.
Yeah, and then we even asked, we said, if you had some confusions about how truly we are out in the community or disbelief, why didn't you phone us and ask us to maybe explain in a little bit more detail, or send us an email and say, look, your proposal is kind of interesting, but it's a little vague. Could you please, be more specific? And again, they just kind of hemmed and hawed. And, I think, again, it was just an excuse to, you know, we're up against, a lot of more need in the community, right? Homelessness, mental health, childcare, education, as a cultural organization, it's hard to tell your story and have that be perceived as a need when, a lot of people do understand, especially, during or after COVID, about how much people missed getting out into, museums or music, and how important that is integral part of people's lives, right? So I think, again, I think you're right. Probably we got dinged by AI possibly, but yeah, I just found it very interesting that they didn't even bother to phone for a follow-up.
Yeah. And it sounds like you're not alone looking at some of the some of the responses in the chat. So Deborah, I see your hand up, but I also want to make sure that anybody who wants to speak is jumping in too. Go ahead, Deborah.
Sorry, didn't mean to be talking too much.
No,
But,
no, no, no. I love the talking.
The other thing was, what we're finding is, so we have to keep really incredibly detailed data notes, this exact many kids in this exact many schools and this exact many volunteers, and this is how many hours, and that this is how much it was over last year. Like, it's just fine detail. So we can then come out and say, well, we, in this program, we had a 23.5% increase, and this one we don't. And so this one we're eclipsing, they just want to see that, like, absolute, clear numbers. I hope everybody's doing that. Which is hard when you're trying to say that we are going to inspire children to care about the earth. Well, how are you going to quantify? If I give you $1, how are you going to say that's going to become $10 over the lifetime of the kid because you did this one thing? And, you can't track that. You can't go to a second grader and say, now that you've learned about the watersheds, how are you likely now to become an environmental steward in the future and go into a STEM career when you're, 18, and the second grader is like, so.
Right.
Yeah, we had so my organization supports small business owners, and so we do direct education for the small business owner, but also help them connect with other resources that they need, like technical assistance or lenders. And we have good records of the people that we work with, and we do post surveys to see if they learned anything from our events and all of that. In some instances, we're able to also know who they connect with. But we're having funders ask us, well, like, how many loans did your small business owners get? And I was like, we're not giving out the loans. So we're trying to figure out how to track that, because we want to know too. But that requires getting data from lenders, which is difficult. So yeah, I feel like they're just, if we could say, oh yes, like, we thousands of dollars of loans went to these business owners, like, they want to fund us, but otherwise they don't. And I'm like, well, we also need funding to figure that out as well. Figure out this longer term impact, like what happens to them once they leave our programs. I think every nonprofit wants to know that, and it's tough to track. It's really tough.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like there's just, there's the difficulty in the finding, tracking, maintaining, but also the unrealistic expectations of the funders too. Um, I know that not everyone is in a position to have like frank conversations with their funders. But I really do think that if you can, like, I don't know, summon your inner Wonder Woman or something like that and just say, like, okay, I'm looking at this application that I'm getting ready to submit to get renewed funding. And some of these questions are just ridiculous. I'm going to see if I can set up a meeting with my program officer and just have a conversation about the questions and see, like, and maybe help them see how these questions aren't the right questions. It might not go anywhere, but it might wind up being super fruitful. You might find out that, oh, actually, like we can waive this whole application form. Why don't we do a different thing? I've had that happen, and I was just like, what? Which can be amazing. And sometimes it's like, can't do anything about that. The process is the process. But you might get an advocate internally so that when they do their annual review of their processes, you've got somebody who now has heard the process is hard. Susan?
I wonder how we can collectively start, continue to push this trust-based philanthropy, because, I saw a few funders, because of COVID, basically say what we all want. Like, yes, we will give you unrestricted funds. No, we do not need to hear, a massive amount of data reporting after the fact. We trust you as an organization to manage the funds well, that it aligns with your mission. I mean, I'm basically, like I'm sure a lot of the people here, you're a development office of one, right? And jumping through so many hoops is so difficult, so frustrating. I think there should be more of a movement to have, as you say, have these dialogues with funders and say, especially like what Deborah was saying about, well, the next generation of the foundation children come in and, oh, they have a different focus now. And I think it's just going in the completely wrong direction, and trust-based philanthropy should be something that we should be all pushing.
Amen, sister. um, I think that part of it is if we all have skin in this game, right? So if we want to move that needle, they need to start hearing those types of things from all of us. So I know that those are, again, hard conversations to have, especially if they're a new funder. If your boss would freak the hell out if you had that conversation, you might not want to have that conversation. Don't put your job in jeopardy. But when you've got that type of relationship where you can be like, can we talk about this? Has your foundation started thinking about this? This is being talked about a lot publicly. I'm curious. Like, if you go in, maybe even with that, type of curiosity, could you start brokering more of these conversations? You just need a couple of folks. Remember, they're human beings on the inside, right? You just need a couple more folks who buy into that way of thinking, or who are an advocate on your behalf. To be that squeaky wheel internally that helps move that foundation to a new direction. So we need to, one of the things that I know that I suffered from a lot was like, I would think the foundation as the giant beast, especially if they were a giant beast. But it wasn't them. It was, it was David and Susan and, like all of these different people inside the organization. And all of those people had a voice. Outside of the organization, I didn't. But if I could get them, if I could convince them that our values were important to bring to the table, then that's how we can make the change. We know this in our daily work, right? One person at a time, one heart, one mind, we just got to keep plugging away. Use some of those same tactics with your foundation folks. And it going into it back to the presentation, it's part of how we're going to make how we're going to stem the tide of this changing landscape. So let's talk a little bit about the why, and then we'll go into the solutioning. Oh, I love that you guys got new funding because of the relationships that you built. Awesome. See. All right. So we wouldn't be our nerdy selves here at Progressive Multiplier if we didn't talk a little bit about the nerdy stuff, which is like, part of what happened. How did this all of a sudden it feels really sudden that like everybody is navel gazing all at the same time. Well, it wasn't hard to figure out that it was coming. If you know what the IRS rules are for foundations. So the foundations have an expenditure rule that they have to give at least, it's a floor, not a ceiling, though a lot of folks treat it as a floor, 5% of their endowment away every year. But that's a 3-year running average that they have to do it. So why does that, if you're like, well, they have to give away 5% every year, well, you have to think COVID, the movement for Black Lives. COVID took a minute. We're still dealing with it, but the big part of it that lasted a good 2 years. They way outpaced their giving. Lots of foundations gave, 10, even 20, 30% more of their money away during that time because they were really responding to a need. Well, what happens 2 years after that when COVID isn't so much of a need and you're just now dealing with a math equation? Is their math equation tells them, well, because you gave bajillions of dollars away 2 years ago, the floating average is, we're at like 4% already. We don't have to give very much away and still be in IRS compliance this year. So some, foundations are, live and die by that moving average. And they just say, okay, because of what we did the last 2 years, this is the bare minimum we have to give out this year. So hence a precipitous drop in the amount of giving that they're doing. It opens wide the window for them to be like, perfect time to navel gaze, perfect time to rethink about strategy, because we don't have to give out that much money. This also happens not just by giving away money, but if you've got big fluctuations in the stock market. So during COVID, we saw the market go down. We're way out of that right now. But because we're talking about moving averages and a 3-year period or a 3-year window, 3 years ago, the market was not great. 2 years ago, the market started to rebound, but it wasn't fully back. So you have the average size of the endowment relative to the amount of money they've already given out affects how much they have to give away. Now, we always want the funders to do more than what the bare minimum is. But we don't have power there. That's their boards, that's their finance officers, that's their internal decision making. We can, of course, advocate. And if we want to be fair, they stepped up when we needed them to step up during COVID and a little bit during the movement for Black Lives. But we also know that they sort of pulled back since then. So there are lots of promises that were made during that same period of like, yeah, this isn't a temporary thing. We're not just responding to this moment. This is a real and true change in what we're doing because we're going to be change leaders and not just reactionary. Well, we're discovering that they're probably just they were more reactionary, in fact, than they were going to make permanent change. So we are seeing some of the promises that were made be pulled back, and they're not actually providing more funding to Black and brown-led organizations. For example, that was a big one that was said. There were a lot of folks that are like, oh, this food insecurity problem that happened, spotlight that got shown during COVID is really not something that goes away when, now that folks aren't, not that we're no longer quarantining anymore. This is actually a bigger issue that we need to deal with nationally. Well, some have, moved on from that already. So, we have that rethinking of like, yeah, we probably made too bold a statement a couple years ago. We're just dialing it back now. And then there's just the reality of like, they technically don't have to. There's also the political issue. And I know that I saw in the chat, like the political environment is something that's a little bit scary. We know election years, individual giving goes down. I was interviewed by the Chronicle of Philanthropy like in 2008 about this. Like, this is not new. We've seen this for a really long time. Every presidential election year, individual giving goes down for nonprofits because folks are giving it in lots of other places. And most donors are your bread and butter donors, and they only have but so much expendable cash that they can give away in any given month. And especially with the rise of monthly giving, which is a beautiful thing, it also means in the past, okay, they gave to the candidate X, Y, or Z in June. I still have a bite at the apple in July to get that person to give me money. Well, if everybody's signing up somebody for monthly, it's gonna be a little bit harder to get those individual donors. But just remember, the election season ends. So your job isn't to go like turtle shell, hide, be silent right now. Stay out there, stay loud. Just look at your results. If you're doing lots of emailing, if you're doing texting or social, whatever, look at your results with that grain of salt of like, there's so much noise right now. Folks are being pulled in so many different directions. I just need to stay in their brain, stay at the, be the gnat buzzing around, like be in their periphery on their social media pages, so that when they're ready to come back, when they're ready to refocus, they will refocus. There's also just a reality of how the funder class gets really pulled by by the nose by the punditry and the political consulting class, who, if you saw the debate last night, you know that pundit class is going ham. The articles that I saw this morning, I'm like, why are y'all stoking these fears? This is not going to happen. You're just drama queens and you need to just take a beat. Like, in history, incumbents, like 9 presidencies in a row, incumbents always flop their first debate. Why are we shocked? Like debates are just debates, but we have these like knee jerk, whatever, something in the media happens, knee jerk reactions, like, holy cow, this is the end of the world. And there are now so many pundits and talking heads and consultants out there who are like whispering in the ears, giving these public hot takes that are creating so much noise, especially these dramatic moments of noise. It makes funders who do fund in this space go, I'm hearing a whole lot of stuff and I just don't know what to do. So I'm just going to take a time out and wait. Well, if they wait too long, when the funding becomes available, it might not be a good time for you to, it might be too late for you to actually put it into action to do, for example, your civic engagement work. But this is a conversation that happens all the time. I think it's like a common cliche, Democrats in disarray, or just, anytime there's something that's movement based. I'm not suggesting that this is a partisan conversation, but whenever there's anything that's movement based, issue based, clearly with Dobbs, we've seen it with the environment, we've seen it with immigration. Whenever there's like an issue based thing that happens, there is a hot takes moment that keeps happening really publicly, and the people with power and have the ears of these funders muddy the conversation, and it takes us time and effort to like clean and clear that water so that we can then get our messaging out there. But just know that that's a reality, and if you feel like your funders are being affected by the hot takes and the drama and some of the like general noise around the subject matter that's connected to your mission, then offer to be that calming voice, that expert opinion that they can hear, that isn't drama filled, unless you've got drama and you need to fill it, but you need to fill it in a very specific way. Just make sure it's the right voice that they're hearing. Go ahead, Deborah.
So you bring up a good point, because scenario planning for which way it goes, and some have said it'll return to normal. Some have said we're gonna get more money if one person gets elected and less money if another have you got a sense of this stuff?
It's June. All right, it's July. The world is going to change 5, 6, 10 times between now and November. I think scenario planning is an important thing to do. But what I would do is have like real grown up measured conversations about true scenario planning, and I wouldn't revisit the scenario every time there's a hot take moment and everyone's amped up. Make sure when I do scenario planning, I try to do it in a moment. I try to do it in a moment when we're all calm, cool, collected. Now, sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can only scenario plan when a crisis moment happens. We just found out we're losing our biggest funder. We're not getting renewed, and that was supposed to come in 2 months. It's hard to scenario plan in a crisis, but sometimes you have to. But I'm talking about like really thoughtful scenario planning. When you're doing your budgeting, try doing a 5-year budget. Try looking at, and then also saying, all right, not only am I budgeting long term and trying to figure stuff out on the long term financially, but then programmatically. If we stay on this trajectory, what does that look like? Then you can introduce fork in the road number 1. If this scenario happens, what's that? But I would definitely do it in a time where everyone's sort of clear and level-headed and not in a responsive mode, or you're just gonna spend a lot of time in meetings thinking about options and opportunities, or things that you could do that never last more than that news cycle. And y'all don't have that kind of time. you know you know the I mentioned earlier also that like not only are there all those more nonprofits filling out more applications, 2,300 LOIs for one grant, for as somebody mentioned in the chat. They're I also mentioned that they're understaffed. Both of those things like come into play, not only as like as a possibility, but that's just a reality. You can't manage all of the work that you have to do if you've got too many balls in the air. You can't do that. They can't either. Understanding that is important, because then you can also then try to be, when you do have a relationship with the program officer, you can try to be a like foil to that system. How can I be of help? Is there any way that I can present you my information in a way that's just easier for you to digest, so that I don't need to give you a wall of words? Would it be like, could I do something in short form so that it's easier, quicker, like offer them solutions that are like solution for you and solution for them. But these are just realities that we know. We're seeing it. If you are reading the Chronicle, you'll see lots of departures in the foundation realm. You see lots of departures in the nonprofit sector too. It's a perfect storm right now. So go ahead, Susan.
I mean, I guess this is also just getting back to what you said a little bit earlier about these, portals, and how it not only kind of stifles your ability to explain your program, because, there's so many word counts, and I understand, but I feel like if I can't tell my message in, less than a couple paragraphs, then I shouldn't be, a development officer. But when they limit you so much that you can't even really explain what they're asking for, or if, for example, as you said, it's a funder that you've been getting funds for a long time, and they're still making you jump through the same hoops to fill out the form, my name, my address, my telephone number, you're like, oh my goodness, you certainly have this information on me. And when we've had these conversations with some of these larger foundations or family, and they just, I don't know if they're just stubborn, or I think they almost get a little offended when you try to make some suggestions of how to make this a little bit more easier. And again, I guess back to this, I guess trust-based philanthropy, it's just really frustrating. I'm sorry, that's all I'm sharing today is frustration.
Dude, I hear you so loud. I think the thing in my situation that I shared earlier, when I finally was at get a breaking point, I just contacted the funder directly and was like, egads. The thing that really landed with them was when I started talking about the amount of time. And so when I started to talk to other funders, I started talking about the amount of time that it took. And so when, I was in the world when they moved from paper reports to electronic reports. Um, and I literally would have conversations and say, that whole thing about like it takes longer to write something briefly. And I literally would say, like, I wrote out my answers to your questions and it took me this amount of time. And then I had to rewrite them to fit your word count. And it took this many more hours. And by
Yeah,
by being
exactly.
that explicit, it helps them go like, oh, because they think, well, you wanted shorter reports. That's not what we were talking about. we didn't, we weren't talking about fewer word count. We were talking about simpler, concise. Um, Give me the space I need to answer the question. You can say, like no word count limit, but we're looking for a short answer in the realm of 250 words. That would be like awesome to me because it gives me the context of like, they're not looking for a book here. They're looking for a short answer, but they're not going to limit me if it takes me longer. Like little things like that. And just saying that over and over, like giving them examples is great. Also, don't worry about the stubborn. I would bring it up annually. I would try it or whatever increment of reporting that you have. um I would try saying it in different ways with different, different perspectives. And also the way that I do things like this is I just make it a little jokey because that's who I am. I try to be very light in these types of conversations because the work we do is so heavy. We all need a little bit. And I just might be like, hey, this is your quarterly like check-in to see if there's any possible way we could do reporting slightly differently. The reason why I say don't worry about being a broken record or being a nag or the stubbornness is that these are, it's like, think about your organization. If you were trying to change the way that something worked in your organization, it would probably take multiple attempts, multiple pointing out what the problem is, and then a whole process to make that shift, right? Even if it was just an inch, it would take like moving a mountain to make that little, it probably is like that for them. So you need to keep bringing it up. They could be in a process of thinking about how to revamp their reporting, and they just started that process 2 months ago. But if you gave up because you tried 3 times already and it didn't go anywhere, then you don't know that they're in this process. Well, then, by saying that, you could find out, oh, we're actually in the process. I would love to be part of a focus group or, to give my input, what it's like, because not only have I touched your report or application, I've done dozens and dozens of or hundreds. And I can tell you like which ones I think get closer to being awesome. Um, then suddenly you can bring yourself to be a seat at the table. So just don't give up hope. They're human. There's human. They've got hearts. I promise you. It's just machines are hard to move. But frustrating as hell. I'm not minimizing that. And sometimes you're just not going to make a movement, but you can hang up the phone or, like close that email and feel like I've done my job of advocating for my organization today. All right. So let me lean in more into this whole area of like, what can we do about it? Part of it is that we just need bigger safety nets, bigger, stronger nets. Make sure that you are in a constant state of refilling your pipeline with prospects, and you're doing what you need to do to add more potential funders to your mix. And not in the spaghetti at a wall approach, but like, are they really good prospects? Do we have mission, vision, values alignment? Do we have approach alignment? Do all of the things line up? Like, would we make the cutest couple ever? If you're meeting that test, they should absolutely be on your pipeline. But if you don't, if your funding list is like everybody who funds you and 3 prospects, you're probably not doing enough research. You should have like not only 4 times the money amount, but 4 times the number of funders on the list of who should be funding you than there are who are funding you. And that's work. And it can be really frustrating to have like all of these people who you've got to build a relationship with that you're not getting, and you're spending your time and you're not getting money on. But unfortunately, that's the name of the game. is we've got to keep that pool big and nurtured. So set up automations in a way that you can send out constant information, like consistent on a regular drumbeat, quarterly, monthly, whatever is the right drumbeat, to those prospective funders, info about your organization so that you can just stay in their periphery. Yeah, so do your research, build a bigger net. I know it's easier said than done. It's hard. But if you're not spending time on it, find an hour. Like do that one thing, to find an hour once a week, once a month, calendar it, be faithful to that time, and you might spend 3 months, 1 hour every month for 3 months and not find a new prospect. But if you keep that on your to-do list and you actually use that time to do research, I promise you'll start to find more alignment. You'll learn more about the landscape. Also, you can use that time to try to think differently. Like, am I being too limiting in the way that I'm thinking about our mission, vision, values, projects, program areas? Do I need to think, is there a spin that I'm not doing? Talk to your partners in comms and other areas and find out how they also talk about your programs. And they might talk about it in a way that you hadn't thought about it before. And now that opens this whole other area of funder that you could possibly go talk to. I know that sounds vague and feels vague, but I have had that conversation where it was like, oh, I didn't even think about this as a youth development. I was only thinking as a education. Like I didn't like I was looking at the cause, not the effect, or I was looking at the effect and not the cause, so sometimes also pulling back and having conversations inside might give you another perspective of like, oh, there's this whole very small column of funders that I could be looking at, but I didn't even realize that I could be looking at them because I wasn't thinking about our work in that way. We're not accepting unsolicited proposals right now. Means they just don't have the capacity. I try not to ascribe malice as much as possible. It's hard not to. It's hard not to be like, you're just gatekeeping, you're just hoarding your money. It could also just be like, they just can't. They can't have 2,300 proposals for one grant, right? So they are under a workload management problem, just like we are. And we have to find ways of just getting in there. It's like sliding into their DMs. We got to find ways to get into their inbox. So do the thing where, like, if you've got one person's email address there and you can figure out the nomenclature of how they do emails, start figuring out, ask your friends, do you know anybody at that organization? Oh, you talked to, what's her last name now? Okay, click, click, click. Hi, have your best like intro email on lock and just, start trying to find and reach out to people. Use LinkedIn. I was really, like protective of my LinkedIn when I first started using it. And I only connected with people that I was like actually connected with. In this role, anybody who wants to connect with me, I will connect with, because my role now as a funding intermediary means that I got to keep my, I need to be open. I want to be open. So other folks are going to be that way too. Connect with folks on LinkedIn, use that as an opportunity. You might not get their direct email, but you can message them. You can start a conversation there and move it elsewhere. Really, and this is also about investing in just relationship building. So it's not just like being the nag. It would be it's also just being like making sure you're putting your director of first impressions hat on when you're writing that first email, when you're having that first conversation. Because if they don't know your organization, how you engage with them in this moment is going to be how they see your organization. So I do like overly wordsmith that first couple of emails that I send out. I do the thing, I was taught this a million years ago. If you're going to do a phone call or write an email to someone and it's introduction and they don't know you, force yourself to smile while you're doing it. It is impossible to write, I swear to you, to write or talk negatively if you're smiling. So it'll force you to bring forth a friendlier tone. And especially if you're like, if your stuff, I worked with a lot of attorneys, I worked with lots of legal services organizations, and the writing sometimes was so heavy jargon, so heavy professional, overly professional, um, that it almost prevented us from being warm. So it's just like, nope, I am not an attorney. I am not that person. I get to not be perfect. So I'm going to write like me. I'm going to sound like me. I'm going to write well with a smile on my face, and maybe that smile will shine through. And I started to see much different responses to my interactions that way. So that's a little old school tip. Give it a try. But definitely, like, work your relationships, work those people. Don't think of it, don't think only in terms of I need to get into this institution, but I need to meet Sarah. I want to meet John. How do I go about meeting them as individuals? Analysis paralysis. So remember earlier when I talked about like, all of those funders that are doing that navel gazing right now and having that strategic realignment. I mentioned this before about like offer to be the dog and pony show. Ask them if you could be part of that discussion. Be willing to be, and also that means you're going to be doing some labor for free, but hopefully it'll pay dividends because they're going to keep funding you. But help, offer to be of service in this moment while they're trying to figure out if these priorities still align with theirs, by giving them the ammunition that they need to stand up and fight for it. Like, this is how important this funding is. Or let me be a thought leader, let me be part of this panel, and let me, invite them to participate in conversations that you're having within the movement in the work area of work, so that they can hear from multiple voices on the subject matter and the importance of funding these efforts. And another approach is that sometimes the strategic planning isn't foundation wide and it's program wise. Are there other program areas in the foundation that aren't going to be touched? Sometimes it's it's foundation wide, but their president's fund or whatever they call it is their unrestricted pot, and that never is in jeopardy. You could see, is there a way for you to get access to other either areas of the foundation or areas of funding that aren't being tied up in the strategic planning process? And is it like it could be like wound up being like just twice as effective. I've accidentally had this happen, not because I'm fancy, but I just accidentally had it happen, where I wound up getting connected to another program officer, and I wind up juggling 2 grants from the same foundation because I, was able to like find ways to spin our work and not just say, I'm not going to be pigeonholed by this one program because our work is multifaceted. So let's see if we can do all of this. Again, not because of brilliance, just because I tried something different and it happened to work one time. Standing out as part of how you get through that fray, where you get to stand, and be noticed. So of course, funder briefings are great. Panels and blogs, being present, being in the forefront, showing that you are subject matter experts is really important. Make sure that you're putting your value proposition front and center. Like the why you and why now should be rolling off your tongue without, that you should be able to do that at any moment, at any time. But really making them feel like you are the safest bet of all of those proposals that landed in their inbox. Because you're a known quantity, you know what you're doing, you're an effective communicator, and you're that safe, comfy blanket they can always curl up with. And that really does go a long way. I mean, some of those, we all know organizations that like have been getting funding since the Paleolithic era. And you're like, how come are they continually getting the money? Well, they're probably got really good PR and comms. Um, just make sure that folks know that they're not the best game in town and that they've got competition. And in fact, or maybe it's not competition, that they can't be they're good in their area without you being awesome in yours. So hey, look at us. It doesn't have to be a either or, it's a both and, both and, like listed 8 to 10 grants are going out. So they can love that other group and still love you back. So just again, this is sort of like the thing about like find ways to set automations so it doesn't necessarily impact the quantity of work that you do, but find ways to communicate more with your funders. Like don't do it just at reporting time. Try to get intermittent updates out there. Also find ways to include your funders in some of the work that you do. If you're doing some big report, don't just ask them for money for the report. Ask them for money, of course, but don't just ask them for money. A lot of foundations see themselves as subject matter experts too. Do they have a voice that they could lend to this conversation that you're having, a report or a panel or something like that? To make the relationship as reciprocal as you can possibly make it. Another way in to new funders is to look at your partners. Who are they getting funding from that you're not getting funding from? Is there a way that you can partner with them in a proposal? Like, is there, if you're working with a similar population and they're providing one type of service, is there a wraparound or add-on service that you all do that if you partnered together, you would actually have a much more holistic approach to the problem? So now you've set up a scenario where both organizations are going to get financial needs met, but the service provision is going to be even better and possibly the outcomes are even better. And you might already be doing it. You might already be providing a wraparound. You've just never packaged it that way and said, hey, you guys are helping folks on the, in or helping folks on the out. Let's just talk about this as a continuum of care, for example. See if joint fundraising opportunities are there. So you can go in as a subgrant, you can go in as a joint project, but suddenly your name is in a funder's ear where it wasn't once before. So I ran through a bunch of those real quickly because I wanted to make sure that we had just a handful of minutes left to be able to like double back and see what thoughts, questions, comments folks had. Do other people have ideas for how do we deal with this landscape that I didn't touch on? Anybody do any funder briefings lately and have found them to be really helpful?
No, but I did talk to one funder group that's like an early childhood funders group to see if I could, or if they could kind of pitch us to the rest of the people that are in their group. And so they're like, give me a 1-pager, give me a little trifold, and we can do that. Like, okay.
Awesome. So then you just, follow up and we'll keep our collective fingers crossed for you. So are any of these strategies things that any of you think you might try to deploy in the coming weeks, months? Or, the Polly, you're crazy, none of this is helpful. Give me that too.
I mean, your comment to have 4 times the amount of asks in that you do is eye-opening, to say the least. So I have to think about that. I mean, we just kind of wrapped up our budget, got board approval last Monday, and I was kind of patting myself on the back that, I already have $1 million worth of asks out there, and, it's not even July 1st, and I'm going to start, next week doing the prospect research again. But now you're making me think, I need $4 million worth of asks to get my 1 million. So
Well, the way, look, it's baby steps, right? If you typically have been doing it your way and it's been working, adding more to the pipeline isn't going to hurt you, right? One of the things that I started to do was also, I don't know if you do those weighted, a weighted percentage projection where it's like, this is, I 100% think that this is going to come in. Well, I stopped using 100% unless I had it in writing. So if I felt like it's 100%, I put it in at 90%. If I felt like something was 80%, I put it at 75 or 70%. So I started to adjust my surety quotient of what I thought the funding availability was, so that it gave me more wiggle room, so that if I got a no unexpectedly, it hurt a little less because I planned ahead. So now suddenly, after I made adjustments, that, before thinking about it in this way, that I was sure this $1 million was coming in, now looks like more like 850K feels like it'll come in. Now I know I've got to find $150,000 worth of requests to go make. And maybe those will come in, I like at 10, 15, 20%. But if I put more asks out, I've created a bigger safety net. So I don't necessarily put $4 million in asks out. It might be that I'm just now, the way that I start in the beginning, it may just be that the way I've structured my planning now means that I'm putting $1.25 million worth of asks out, $1.5 million, and then slowly up to $1.5 million worth of asks out. And I've got another million or 2 million in the pipeline of like, I'm at the low end of the relationship stage. So they'd be like at a 5%. But I'm working those relationships, and those are like actual real relationships. Like I'm actually having conversations, not like, oh, I think they're cute, so I'm putting 5% down. If that's a better frame, I hope. I appreciate y'all so much. Thank you for all the time and attention and conversation. It was amazing. You will have Kafili back next time. He'll be talking about increasing capacity with technology. I enjoyed every minute of this conversation. I hope you found it helpful. And of course, you will get copies of the slide deck and the video at another time. Y'all take care. Have a happy holiday week next week if you celebrate, and we'll see you around. Bye.